Right. So imagine you're in 1926. No, wait, hang on. 1927. You're standing in a freezing, mud-caked street in Paris. Europe is an absolute, complete shambles. It is financially, physically broken after the First World War. You've got the Weimar Republic financially bleeding out. You've got the Russian Revolution having completely destabilized the East. And right in the middle of this massive historical hurricane, a director decides to completely rewrite a tragic, incredibly cynical Russian Civil War novel just to flex his camera skills. I mean, he strips out the author's entire core message. There was just an unbelievable amount of money at it, dragging a 50-pound wooden camera off its tripod and through the physical dirt just to make you feel the grit of the pavement. He creates this absolute visual...
Hold on a second. Hold on. Wait. You are utterly, completely blanded by film school nostalgia right now.
I am not...
You are. You're talking about him as if he's some visionary genius who descended from the heavens.
Right.
He was a madman with a megaphone. The resulting film is rather dull, frankly, and completely dodgy in places. I mean, you're completely romanticizing a bloke who basically threw a massive tantrum on set, betrayed the original author, and called it high art.
I am not romanticizing anything. I am giving him his proper due, which history demands. Look, you, listening to this right now, pull up a chair, get comfortable, because you are about to be dragged into a massive, bare-knuckle argument over Georg Wilhelm Pabst's The Love of Jeanne Ney. And I'm telling you straight away, it is absolutely brilliant. It is the absolute crucible of modern visual storytelling. It's the laboratory where the entire grammar of modern cinema was forged.
I promise to expose it for exactly what it is. An overrated, bloated ego trip by a director who couldn't figure out basic pacing to save his life. You can't be serious with this whole masterclass nonsense. It's ridiculous.
Cinema, the magic vehicle, a comprehensive guide. Journey 1, 1913 to 1950.
Oh, I am dead serious. Let's look at the actual history here. Let's look at the context. We were talking about Pabst, right? A guy who is widely considered the third master of German cinema in the 1920s.
By some people.
By most historians. Look, you've got Fritz Lang, who is basically building entire futuristic cities from scratch in Metropolis. You've got F.W. Murnau, who is practically inventing the horror genre with Nosferatu. And then you have Pabst, the holy trinity of the Weimar era.
That's rubbish, mate. The third master, he was a latecomer. Lang and Murnau were out there pioneering the entire medium, literally inventing the rules, while Pabst was still faffing about in the theater. I mean, Pabst didn't even start making films until, 1923?
Do you actually know what was happening in German cinema in 1923?
Yes, the golden age, the absolute peak of...
No, the dying breath of the golden age. It was already over. Expressionism was completely dying out. Kammerspiel was waning. Pabst didn't invent a movement. He just showed up to the party when all the old styles were already on their way out. And he panicked. He didn't panic. He pivoted. But wait. We should probably actually explain what those movements were, because if you don't understand what Pabst was reacting against, you really don't understand why his work is so revolutionary in the first place. So when we talk about German Expressionism, we are talking about a visual style born directly out of the collective massive trauma of World War I. Germany had lost millions of men, the economy was heavily sanctioned, completely crushed by the Treaty of Versailles, and the national psyche was just fractured.
Right, so filmmakers didn't want to show the real world, because the real world outside their windows was utterly depressing and broken.
Exactly.
Instead, they projected this internal psychological terror outward onto the physical sets. They completely, deliberately abandoned reality.
Spot on. If you look at something like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the sets are literally twisted. The buildings lean over at these impossible sharp angles as if they're about to physically crush the actors standing under them.
Yeah.
And the shadows, this is the crazy part. The shadows aren't real shadows cast by lights. They are literally painted in jagged, sharp black triangles directly onto the floors and walls. It was a literal visual representation of a broken mind. It was highly stylized, deeply theatrical, and completely unmoored from anything resembling physical reality.
And then on the other end, you had Kammerspiel, which translates to chamber play. Because Expressionism was so massive and weird and surreal, Kammerspiel was the direct opposite reaction. It was incredibly intimate, moody, really claustrophobic chamber dramas, usually just 2, maybe 3 characters trapped in a single room, dealing with intense psychological breakdowns. No intertitles, just raw, silent, brooding acting. But here's my actual point, the point you're ignoring. By 1923, audiences were utterly exhausted by both of them. They were tired of painted shadows, and they were tired of watching depressed people sit in a single dark room.
Which is exactly why Pabst is properly genius. The old styles, the heavy shadows, the distorted, crazy set, they just weren't working anymore. So Pabst, because he was forced to seek new creative solutions to save the industry, found realism. He took the camera and he pointed it at the actual grimy, dirty world. He treated it as an intermediate stage, sure, but he used it to completely redefine what a camera could actually capture.
Wait, stop. You just said it yourself. He intended realism to be an intermediate stage, a stepping stone. He just got lucky. He stumbled into a gritty aesthetic because he literally didn't know what else to do, and it happens to be the only thing that actually worked for him. It wasn't some grand, calculated, genius reinvention of the cinematic form. He was just a bloke trying to survive in a shifting market.
How can you possibly say he just stumbled into it when you look at Die Freudlos Gas, The Joyless Street from 1925? That film was a sensation. It wasn't just him getting lucky. It was a meticulously crafted, totally naturalist panorama of Vienna during the post-war hyperinflation. We're talking about a historical moment when a loaf of bread cost billions of marks. People were taking actual wheelbarrows full of cash to the bakery just to survive.
Which is a brilliant setting, I'll grant you that. It's a great backdrop.
Yeah. It's way more than just a backdrop, mate. It's a brutal, surgical dissection of society. He exposed the absolute crisis of the middle classes. He showed the brutality of these upstart speculators hoarding food, the utter humiliation of decent, everyday people trying to survive when money was literally functionally worthless. You actually see a butcher in that film, played by Werner Krauss, who actively demands sexual favors from the starving women in the neighborhood just for a tiny piece of meat. The censors banned it globally.
Of course they did.
Because the social missive was so radical, so dangerously close to inciting an actual riot. And let's not forget, this is the film that made monumental global stars out of Asta Nielsen and Greta Garbo. That is not a fluke. You don't stumble into Greta Garbo. That is intense, calculated, highly realistic storytelling.
Oh, come off it. You're just reading the studio PR sheet right now. Let's look at the actual source material we have on Pabst's early career. The actual historical text literally calls Die Freudlos Gas immature. It specifically points out that it suffered heavily from obtrusiveness and melodrama. And that, right there, is the fundamental fatal flaw of Pabst. It's a trait he absolutely never shook off. He just couldn't help himself. He always had to hammer the audience over the head with cheap sensationalism. He couldn't just show a struggling family getting by. He had to show the absolute most extreme, tear-jerking soap opera version of poverty possible.
But the melodrama was an accurate reflection of the times. The times were inherently sensational. People were literally starving to death in the gutters while speculators were drinking champagne a block away. How do you film that without it feeling extreme?
The times were desperate, yes. But his execution of it was pure melodrama. And when he actually tried to step away from the melodrama and get intellectual, it was somehow even worse. Look at the absolute, unmitigated disaster of Geheimnisse einer Seele in 1926. Secrets of a Soul, the famous psychoanalytical drama.
I knew you were going to bring this one up. I knew it.
I have to bring it up. Because you're sitting here calling him a genius. In 1926, he literally tried to make a feature-length, silent lecture on Sigmund Freud's theories. Freud's actual collaborators, Carl Abraham and Hans Sachs, even consulted on the bloody thing. And it is a complete shambles. It is so utterly, embarrassingly misguided.
I reckon you are being incredibly unfairly harsh on that film. Geheimnis eines Seele had the most inventive use of multiple exposure up to that point in cinematic history. He was formally, technically original. He was trying to take the abstract, completely internal landscape of the human mind, dreams, repressed trauma, deep phobias, and project it onto a physical, two-dimensional screen.
And he failed. It was incredibly naive. Just think about what psychoanalysis actually is for a second. It's dense. It's highly verbal. It's entirely about sitting on a couch for years and unspooling complex linguistic traps that your own brain has set for you, trying to literally translate the verbal language of psychoanalysis into the silent visual language of 1920s cinema by just layering spooky images on top of each other. It was like trying to write a complex legal document using only emojis. Cinema's visual grammar just wasn't advanced enough yet to handle dense psychoanalytic theory, so the whole thing just looked like a messy, confusing collage.
Look, let me explain how he actually did those multiple exposures, though, because it absolutely proves his technical ambition, even if you hate the final result. Today, if you want two images on screen at the exact same time, you just drag two video files onto a timeline in Premiere Pro, lower the opacity, and you're done in 5 seconds.
Right.
In 1926, film was a physical, highly flammable strip of celluloid coated in light-sensitive chemicals. To get a multiple exposure, the cameraman had to film the first shot, let's say a man's sleeping face. Then they had to physically cover the lens. They had to wind the film backward inside the camera in the pitch black, calculating exactly how much light they had already exposed that specific strip of film to. Then they adjust the aperture, and then film the second shot, let's say a spooky phantom floating around over the exact same physical strip of film.
Right, and if you miscalculated the math by even a fraction of a second, or if your hand cranked the handle at slightly the wrong speed, you overexposed the film and completely ruined the entire reel. I am not denying it was mechanically difficult.
It was incredibly difficult. It was practically a magic trick.
But just because something is difficult doesn't make it good art. Digging a hole with a spoon is difficult, doesn't make it a masterpiece. It was visual noise masquerading as depth. Pabst didn't understand restraint. He honestly thought that if he just threw enough technical tricks at the screen, it would automatically equate to intellectual profundity. And that fundamental lack of restraint, that total inability to balance flashy technique with actual narrative truth, brings us exactly to the absolute butchery of the love of Jeanne Ney.
All right, okay, fine. Let's get into the love of Jeanne Ney. Because this is where I think he takes all that raw ambition, all that grit from Joyless Street, all those crazy technical experiments from Secrets of a Soul, and finally applies it to a massive epic scale. The setup alone for this film is breathtaking. It is based on a novel by Ilya Ehrenberg, who is a very prominent Soviet writer and journalist. We are in the 1920s, during the absolute height of the Russian Civil War. This is an incredibly messy, brutal, bloody conflict between the Red Army, the Bolsheviks, and the White Army, which was this messy coalition of anti-communists, monarchists, and foreign interventionists.
A conflict that was still incredibly fresh in the minds of the audience in 1927, mind you. People reading the papers knew exactly what was happening.
Exactly. It wasn't some distant, abstract history. It was literally current events. So we follow Jeanne, the young daughter of a French businessman. She has spent 6 years in Russia living through the First World War and the Revolution, and she falls deeply in love with Andrei, who is a handsome, deeply committed Bolshevik communist. The stakes are massive from minute one. It's an epic romance constantly colliding with violent, unpredictable, unstoppable history.
It's an epic soap opera colliding with historical tourism. That's what it is.
Hear me out. The inciting incident is spectacular, and it completely throws you into the chaos immediately. Jeanne's family fails to leave the Crimea before the Red Army actually arrives in town. They are caught in this intense, chaotic crossfire. And Pabst shoots this with such visceral, terrifying intensity. Jane's father is literally killed in a chaotic, messy exchange of shots. It's loud, it's confusing, it feels like actual urban combat. And because she is French, and therefore associated with the bourgeoisie, Jeanne is suddenly about to be executed as a spy by the very revolutionaries her lover fights for. Andrei, the Bolshevik she loves, along with his friend, has to risk absolute treason to save her life and smuggle her out. It is thrilling, propulsive cinema. You are on the edge of your seat because the grand political ideology is actively trying to destroy the personal romance.
But it's heavily reliant on psychological nonsense. You strip away the gunshots, you take away the smoke, and the frantic running around the sets, and the emotional core of it is entirely unearned. It's just one melodramatic crutch layered on top of another.
Yeah.
It relies on the audience just blindly accepting that this sudden romance is somehow profound enough to stop a literal firing squad in the middle of a war zone. It's silly.
Okay, but then they escape and the film shifts entirely. This is what I love so much about it. Jeanne returns to Paris, completely broke, heavily traumatized, to live with her Uncle Raymond, and Uncle Raymond is a private eye. The whole tone of the film shifts completely from a sweeping, war-torn, muddy Russian landscape to this gritty, claustrophobic, dirty, urban Parisian underworld. It suddenly turns into a proto-noir, and then Pabst introduces the villain, Shalabiyev.
Oh, God. Shalabiyev. Right. Let's talk about Shalabiyev.
Yeah. He is a shady, highly opportunistic Russian emigre. He's the exact kind of guy who thrives in the chaos of war. He indirectly caused Jeanne's father's death back in the Crimea by essentially betraying him. Now he's slithered his way into Paris, and he is actively courting Jeanne's best friend. He's being an absolute menace, secretly scheming to steal a massive diamond. And it all culminates in this brutal, incredibly tense sequence where Shalabiyev kills Jeanne's brother during a robbery.
A robbery of the very diamond he's been trying to thanks the whole time.
Exactly. And then to cover his tracks, he tries to frame Andrei. because André has secretly arrived in France on a dangerous mission to spread communist propaganda among the French workers. So the heroic Red Army soldier who saved Jeanne in Russia is now facing the guillotine in France for a murder actually committed by the capitalist opportunist. It's a brilliant, tightly wound, ironic web of coincidence and consequence.
A web of coincidence. Are you joking? It's a contrived, unbelievable mess. It literally requires everyone in the entire city of Paris to inexplicably run into the exact 5 people they knew from a random town in the Crimea. What are the odds? But that's not even the worst part. The original sin of this film, the thing that absolutely, without a doubt, proves Pabst was a narcissistic git who cared way more about ticket sales than actual art, is the ending.
Here we go. I knew we were getting to this.
In Ilya Ehrenberg's original novel, the story ends in tragedy. André is executed. Jeanne is left completely alone, devastated, broken. It is a brutal, honest, unflinching reflection of the era. The Russian Civil War wasn't a fairy tale with a neat bow. Ehrenberg was making a profound, vital point about how vast, uncaring historical forces completely crush individual human lives. The revolution eats its own, and the innocent are ground into dust by the machine. That was the entire point of the book. So what does our genius Pabst do? He completely altered the tragic ending.
He made it cinematic.
He neutered it. He completely stripped it of its teeth. He tacked on a ridiculous last-minute happy ending where the whole truth is magically revealed just in the nick of time. The private eye uncle figures it out. Shalabiev is thwarted and arrested. André is saved from the executioner's block at the literal last second. And Jeanne and André get to look forward to a lovely little happy future together.
Are you joking?
He completely ruined the author's message. He took a profound, heavy meditation on the meat grinder of the 20th century and turned it into a Disney movie.
He adapted it for a cinematic audience. You have to understand the studio system, specifically UFA in Germany at that time. They were hemorrhaging money. They desperately needed films that could sell internationally, especially in America. American audiences did not want to pay money to watch a movie where the handsome romantic lead gets his head chopped off at the end. Pabst was making a pragmatic, necessary choice to ensure the film actually got distributed and seen.
He betrayed it. Pragmatism is just a polite corporate word for selling out. Ilya Ehrenberg was literally living in Paris at the time the film was released, and he openly, loudly protested the film. He publicly called out the director and the press for ruining his work. He was furious. When the actual author of the source material is screaming at you in the papers that you've butchered his central political message, you don't get to call yourself a visionary genius. You're just a studio hack catering to the box office.
That is such a cynical, modern way of looking at it. He rescued the script. The source material we have admits that the script, as it was being developed, was already charged with melodramatics, yes. The narrative structure was inherently a bit pulpy from the start, but Pabst rescued it through masterly direction and total fidelity to the physical setting. He recreated the streets of Paris with such meticulous, grimy detail. He made you literally feel the dampness of the Parisian fog on your skin, the claustrophobia of the detective's office.
Oh, sure, the setting was nice. The cobblestones looked very wet. Congratulations to the props department, give them a medal. But the pacing is wildly, infuriatingly uneven. It is an absolute slog in parts. Look at the subplot with the blind girl, Gabrielle.
Gabrielle is a beautiful, tragic character.
She's a narrative speed bump. Gabrielle is Uncle Raymond's blind daughter, and she wanders around the film being innocent and pure and tragically in love with the villain. It stops the film dead in its tracks. Pabst spends so much time lingering on her pathetic state just to wring cheap tears out of the audience. It's purely sensational emotional filler. You cannot defend that subplot. It is tedious. It doesn't advance the political thriller, just bogs the whole thing down in Victorian-era sentimentality.
I am defending the entire package. Look, I want to pull directly from one of our main sources for this because this isn't just my opinion, this is historical consensus. The research in cinema, the magic vehicle, is spot on here. The authors argue that Pabst was trying to build a completely new visual language. They literally call it a monumental achievement for a reason. He was fusing extreme realism, the mud, the poverty, the actual dirty streets with high, almost operatic emotion because he had the stones to try something nobody else dared.
Yeah.
He was trying to figure out how to make a blockbuster that still felt like a raw documentary.
I reckon the book is being way too kind to him, to be honest. You call it ambition. I call it a massive, unchecked ego trip. Just because a director spends a fortune, drags the camera through the mud, and makes everyone miserable on set, driving the original author to public protest, doesn't make him a genius. He was a proper narcissist with a camera, and I think the book lets him off the hook because it's a quote-unquote classic. Film historians just love to retroactively justify bad pacing if the cinematography is pretty enough.
Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. It's not an ego trip, it's an evolution of the medium. The book gives you the actual credits and the technical breakthroughs that literally changed how every film is made today. If you find the scale of it a bit of a slog, that's on you, not the history. You were looking at a 1927 masterpiece and complaining that it doesn't move like a modern 90-minute Hollywood thriller. You have to meet the art on its own terms.
I'm just saying, I'm looking at it with a modern eye, and it's half brilliant and half nonsense.
Yeah.
The book defends him through a historical lens, sure, but I'm sitting here thinking, mate, cut 30 minutes out of that scene with the blind girl wandering around the apartment, feeling the furniture, and we'd actually have a tight story. It's bloated. It is historically important, maybe, but as a narrative experience to sit and watch, it is a mess.
You know what? We've done 40 of these deep explorations into history, so you know we're never going to actually agree. If you, listening, want to see if this cynical get across from me is right, or if the book actually has it right, buy the thing. The link is in the description. Do you actually have the spine to read the real history, or are you staying lazy and just taking his word for it? Your call. Because if you actually read the text, if you understand what was happening mechanically on that set, you see exactly what Pabst was actually achieving on a technical level. We cannot talk about this film without talking about the camera work. Let's talk about Fritz Arno Wagner and Robert Lasch, the absolute legends behind the photography.
Fine, let's talk about the technical wizardry. I won't deny the camera work was doing something new. I'll give you that much, at least.
Doing something new is the understatement of the century. Remember earlier when I described how heavy and cumbersome cameras were in 1927? These massive, heavy wooden boxes bolted to steel tripods. Pabst and Wagner took a mobile handheld camera out into the actual uncontrolled outdoor scenes of Paris.
Which was incredibly dangerous for the fragile equipment, by the way.
Exactly. They completely unbolted this massive, delicate piece of machinery. Wagner literally strapped it to his chest or carried it in his arms, moving it through the actual uneven cobblestone streets. He was walking backward through crowds of real people, tracking actors in real time. It created a gritty, realistic, almost documentary touch that was miles, decades ahead of its time. Before this, cameras were locked down tight. Actors moved in front of the camera like they were on a theater stage. Pabst made the camera an active participant in the scene. It moved with them. It made the audience feel like they were standing right there on the cobblestones, breathing the Parisian air.
Wait. I give him credit for the handheld shots. I really do. It added a kinetic energy that was incredibly rare for the time. But you're completely ignoring the editing. You can shoot all the dynamic, shaky footage you want, but if you don't cut it together properly, it's just a jumble of images.
The editing is the best part. He, along with Mark Sorkin and Paul Falkenberg, cut this film with such an incredible, imaginative rhythm. Let's explain how editing actually worked back then. You didn't have a computer. You had a pair of scissors, a razor blade, and literal glue. You had to physically hold highly flammable strips of nitric film up to a hot light bulb, slice the frame with a razor, and physically glue it to the next shot. It was painstaking labor. And despite that, Pabst decided that even the shortest, most basic scenes should consist of a multiplicity of shots from completely different angles.
Right, what they called analytical editing.
Right. Instead of just setting up one wide shot and letting two actors talk, which would be incredibly easy to cut, Pabst would film a wide shot, then cut to a massive close-up of a hand reaching for a glass, then cut to the other actor's eyes reacting, then cut to a reflection in a mirror. He was constructing multifaceted observation. He broke a single fleeting moment into a dozen visual fragments. Every glance, every micro-movement was joined with perfect fluidity. It is bloody brilliant. It forces the audience to see exactly what he wants them to see, exactly when he wants them to see it.
Hold on a second. You're selectively reading the history again. Yes, the analytical editing, cutting on movement, breaking down a scene into tiny details was good when it worked. But Pabst was also obsessed with trying to integrate the American style of narrative editing, what we now call invisible continuity.
And he did it really well.
He absolutely did not. The source material explicitly, clearly states he did it with lesser success. Let me explain invisible continuity for the listener, because it's literally the foundation of almost everything we watch on screen today. Invisible continuity is the Hollywood technique of editing so smoothly, so perfectly, that the audience literally doesn't notice the cuts. If I reach for a cup of coffee in a wide shot, the editor cuts to a close-up of my hand at the exact millisecond my fingers touch the ceramic. The physical motion carries your eye across the cut, making the edit invisible. It requires absolute flawless spatial logic. If character A is looking left, character B must be looking right.
The 180-degree rule.
Precisely. Hollywood was perfecting this. Pabst tried to mimic it, but he didn't fully grasp the underlying spatial mathematics of it. He would constantly cross the 180-degree line. He would match physical actions incorrectly from shot to shot. The result was that the editing felt totally jarring in places. You'd be watching a tense scene, and suddenly the entire spatial geography of the room would just flip, and you'd feel mildly seasick. He was trying to play complex jazz before he even learned his basic scales.
But he made up for any minor continuity errors with the optical juggling, the impressive use of reflection, the splitting of the frame, the image multiplication. He was taking known basic methods of storytelling and violently injecting his own highly visual signature into them. There are scenes where you see the action reflected in muddy puddles or split through angled, shattered glass. It adds a whole psychological layer to the physical space.
Visual noise. That's all it was. It was flashy, desperate distraction to hide a fundamentally broken, highly melodramatic script. When your plot involves a blind girl stumbling around crying and a villain literally twirling his mustache, you throw in some frame splitting and cool reflection so the fancy critics call you an auteur instead of a soap opera director. This is a cheap magician's trick. Look at the shiny prism over here so you don't notice how incredibly stupid the plot is over there.
Soap opera director? Are you joking? He gave foreigners in 1927 a realistic, grounded description of Soviet Russians. That was a massive novelty. People outside of Russia, especially in Western Europe and America, had absolutely no idea what was actually happening on the ground in the Soviet Union. The news was heavily censored or totally propagandized. Pabst provided a grounded, realistic, unglamorous portrayal of the Bolsheviks, the White Army, and the sheer bloody chaos of the revolution. He used real Russian émigrés as extras. He made the uniforms look dirty and worn. That is a profound commitment to truth, to realism.
A commitment to truth. He made the main villain a complete cartoon. You cannot claim extreme, gritty realism on one hand and then present Chalabiev on the other.
Fritz Rasp played Chalabiev brilliantly. He was one of the greatest, most expressive character actors of Weimar cinema.
Fritz Rasp played a caricature. He literally slimes his way through the movie. He is so overtly, comically evil that it completely shatters the illusion of this documentary realism you were just praising. You're talking about dirty uniforms and real traumatized Russian extras, and then right in the middle of all this grit is this guy acting like a pantomime villain.
He represents the rot of the old world. He's a symbol.
Exactly, and it's entirely heavy-handed. The overall mood of the film is totally unconvincing because of this massive tonal whiplash. Pabst was trying to portray the malady of post-war Europe, this grand, sweeping epic theme of the old, rotten capitalist world viciously attacking the new, pure revolutionary spirit. But he failed. He completely failed because the evil is excessively caricatured. It's mental. You can't claim extreme realism and then have villains acting like they belong in a cheap Victorian stage play. It makes the movie feel entirely bipolar. Is it a gritty historical document, or is it a staged melodrama? It can't be both, but Pabst keeps aggressively trying to jam them together.
Okay. I concede the villains were a bit broad. I'll give you that much. Chalabiev is a bit theatrical. But you have to see The Love of Jeanne Ney not just as a standalone film, but as the incredibly necessary growing pain in Pabst's career. It was the chaotic testing laboratory where he tried out the handheld camera, the analytical editing, the optical effects, and the fusion of gritty realism with intense psychology. He had to make this messy, incredibly ambitious epic so that he could figure out all these techniques, refine them, and use them to make his actual undisputed masterpiece just a year later.
Oh, here we go. I knew you were going to use this exact excuse.
Yes. Pandora's Box in 1928. Starring Louise Brooks, it is widely, universally considered one of the greatest films ever made. Everything he fumbled with in Jeanne Ney, the mood, the pacing, the balance of realism and psychology, the portrayal of the gritty underworld, he completely perfected in Pandora's Box. The mood in that film is created to absolute perfection. The tragedy is actually earned, not tacked on or stripped away. The characters are deeply flawed, real human beings, not pantomime villains. Jeanne Ney was the crucible. It was the mess and rough draft that allowed the masterpiece to exist.
I am not giving Jeanne Ney a pass just because his next movie was better. That's not how criticism works. You don't get a medal for making a bloated, tonally inconsistent mess just because you learned from your mistakes 12 months later. If I cook you a terrible burnt dinner, you don't praise it just because I made a great steak the next night. The Love of Jeanne Ney is a film completely at war with itself. It has brilliant street photography and a daring handheld camera fighting a losing battle against a script that belongs in a cheap romance novel. It has a director trying to be a cynical, hard-hitting realist while simultaneously tacking on a saccharine, ridiculous happy ending to please the studio executives. It is the absolute definition of a shambles.
It is the definition of ambition. He threw absolutely everything at the screen. He was trying to figure out what cinema could even be in a world that had just violently torn itself apart. The language of film was still being invented, and Pabst was writing the dictionary in real time, literally in the mud of Paris.
And in doing so, he completely tore apart Ilya Ehrenberg's novel. He took a tragic, meaningful piece of literature and sanded down all its sharp edges for mass consumption. So I want you, listening to this, to really think about it. Put yourself in that exact position. Think about your absolute favorite book right now, the one that means the most to you, the one that completely changed how you view the world. Now imagine some famous director buys the rights. He rips out the tragic ending. He fills it with cartoon villains and melodramatic, crying subplots that drag on forever. But he shoots it with the most revolutionary, cutting-edge camera techniques of the decade. The cinematography is objectively stunning. Would you call them a visionary genius, or would you want to wring their neck for destroying the soul of the story?
Oh, shut up. You're being completely impossible. Look, if you aren't completely terrified of engaging in a real debate instead of just listening to the cynic complain, grab the book from the description, read it yourself, and look at the actual history. We're done here.